So welcome back to Ear Elevator. Now we're going to cover chord tones versus passing chords, okay? Or important chords versus like secondary passing kind of chords. So usually the case is primary chords 1, 4, 5, they're going to be your main big bang kind of stuff. There what's going on. Okay, so when you're in the key of C and you're on C, that's being at home. When you go to the fourth tone of the scale, that's like being home away from home. Very close relationship, but we at like mama's house or probably our kid's house or something like that. Because C creates F. If you go back to how the circle of fifths work, you can take the major scale of C, change one note, and F is born literally out of C. And then you go to G. G is like being on the way back to home because it sort of creates C as well. If you go backwards on the circle of fifths, the G scale can turn into the C scale by changing one note. Okay, so G creates C, which creates F. So it's always this movement going that way. Usually when I find myself on the fifth tone of the scale, usually it's coming home. Or it's doing that minor thing going to the 4, providing us a 2-5-1 based on the fourth tone of the scale. That would be a 2-5-1 in the key of F, you know, or it's doing what we call a deceptive cadence. We talked about this in Song Station, where instead of coming home, it goes anywhere else but home. But really, it's just a prolongation of coming home. It's like when somebody's like, I don't want to go home, so I'm going to go blow some time over at this place or go over here or go to the stove. You know, that's kind of like G saying, okay, we know you need to get home, but let's go to the sixth tone. And you feel like the song needs to end. It's like at the end, you know, I just want to thank you, Lord, you know. That's when people keep the song going. Instead of, you know, they'll go, and then they'll stay at the 5, and then they'll go to the 6 instead of doing that, they'll stay at the 5 and then go to the 6. Or they'll go from the 5 to the 3 and then they'll go to the 6. So a lot of that happens as well. But for the most part, you know, G is coming home at some point. It has to. F is away from home. It could move different places. And then usually everything else is providing, you know, variety. So you got the minor chords still here that just provide variety because you don't want to just be going C, C, F, F, C. You don't want to just be doing that, you know? So you put in that. See how we did that? So if I'm hearing that, in my head, I'm like, okay, I know it's going from the 1 to the 4. The 2 chords in between are passing chords. They're fast. They're not main things. If you took them out, it wouldn't make a difference. You know, you still have your song. Now, you can't take the C out. You can't take the F out. You can substitute them, but, you know, they're your main things going on. So that G minor 9 to that dominant 9 chord there with the 6 in there, well, that was taking us to the F. So getting good at hearing that, you know, that happens a lot. Sometimes it goes, it'll back up and it'll do this, but it'll do that in terms of G first. It'll do a 2-5-1 in the key of G, like A, the same chord. This chord we're doing here, this G minor 9, is the same thing moved up a whole step here. A minor 9. Lower the thumb and then go to D on the bass, and then go to the same G minor 9. It's like the same pattern. You can even keep going and learn that whole thing using the circle of fifths. So hearing those things, that's what makes the song sounds better. So instead of going, you know, now you can go, okay, let's do that first. See, that was our first variation. these two passing chords. A lot of gospel songs. Now let's try something else. Same chord progression. We can add G to come back home. Okay, so we just took the same C going to F, and now we put passing chords in there. We went 6, 2, 5, 1, 4. Now here's another thing. Instead of coming back from the 4 to the 1, or even going, notice I went from the 4 to the 5, because remember, 5 is we're on our way back home. 4, we're pretty much away from home, but home away from home. But 5, you can always use that to come back to a diatonic 1, a nice major sounding 1, always. It's really not any circumstances where you really can't, unless the song's doing something way different. So what else can we do? Remember I said the 1 and the 6, they substitute? This is what you call a tonic substitution. You know, these are relatives. This is relative major, the 6th tone is relative minor. You learned that in like fundamental factory. So sometimes you may hear songs, you might even be good at picking this 6, 2, 5, 1, 4. The numbers come from the bass. So 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 4. Very common, okay? But you may hear the bass go, or they may go, you know, famous in gospel. If you don't know anything else, learn these sharp 9, sharp 5 chords, because anywhere you play minor chords, you can substitute these chords. Okay? Anywhere you do those chords, you can substitute these chords. You know, they work good too. They make it bluesy and altered. But what if you heard this progression? It went from 6, 2, 5, 1, 4, and then it went 3, and then it went 6, 2, 5, 1. Gospel does that a lot, okay? But what's really going on? Well, if you're listening to this, all you've done is substitute coming back home to going over here to cousin's house, the relative minor. We're relatives. That's all you've done. And it just so happens you set it up so that you could start it off doing the same thing you would normally do. So rather than just starting at home and then going to it, you just went straight back to it. So listen carefully. So we went 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. And then when we went 4, and then to the altered, 3, and then 6. But 6 pretty much is 1. And if you think about it, that's the C major 7. We're just playing A bass. That's how closely in relationship they are. Okay? So you're just starting the same thing. Everything has a purpose. Now you could even say, okay, well, I can either go directly there, but what if I back up? Because I know the 7th tone leads to the 3. If I'm hearing this in a song, or so people add that. And now they've just bypassed the 1. But we know it's there. We know what key we're in. So we haven't even played the 1. We started at the 1, but now we totally changed the song around. So you'll hear that a lot. And even though you may not find your bass on the 1, you still need to know that this is stuff dancing around the 1. You know, the A is substituting, but it could have very well came back. It just sounds cooler when you're coming straight to A. So this is circular movement at work, and a lot of songs follow the circle of fifths. In fact, in one of my blog posts, I taught it would almost be equally as important to learn your major scale, not only like this, but to actually learn it like that, and then even go to F. So learn it from 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, 4. So That's the easier way to do it. 7, 3, 6, 2. And then it just repeats. Because that's how music works. It's like one big circle. So, you know, starting at the 7th tone, if you played the chord that we know, okay, play this fancy chord, even though it's not diatonic, it's very common. It might as well be in gospel music. This is the major scale in circle. We basically took the whole major scale and rearranged it using the circle of fifths and started from the highest tone and made our way backwards. You would think we would end on C, but C also pushes to F. And pretty much after F, we get out of the scale. We really can't go any further. I mean, we can go, you hear this a lot too. And so you hear sometimes F will go to the 4th of F, but we've really gone into another key once we do that. But pretty much going from the 7 to the 3 to the 6 to the 2 to the 5 to the 1 to the 4 is a great way to reinforce the circle. And if you listen to the relationships, you can't go wrong. Listen to what's going on in the song. Pay attention to how the 7 sounds going to the 3, how the 3 sounds going to the 6. And then the cheater way is that you know how this sounds. Doesn't matter what key I'm in. You know, you could change it to any key you want, but it sounds the same. If I did the same progression that we learned here, if I go, you know, and then it's the same progression. What is that? A relative pitch lets you know that is the same thing as, doesn't matter what key I'm in, that 6, 2, 5, 1, I can't get around that. I'm so cognizant, I'm listening to songs, I know how that sounds. And that right there, if you're into gospel music, I'd say a good half of songs, 50% will probably cover that 6, 2, 5, 1 just right there. And when you hear that, you can cheat. You can be like, wow, I got the next 4 chords covered. Like when the choir director would bring me songs, I would sit there and I would listen to it. And when I saw familiar changes like that, 6, 2, 5, 1 is one of them, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 is another, 2, 5, 1 is another, 1, 4, 5 is another, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. You could take the whole thing, like Gospel Keys 202 talks about, 2 to the 5 and stay there. You know, 4, 5, 1. You know, I got these bags of chords. I already know these patterns. And all I'm doing is listening for entry points and outry points. Outry or outro or whatever. It's like one chord, you kind of know what it's doing. When I hear this 3 chord, that sharp 9, sharp 5 alter chord, listen to it. You listen, I know that's going to 6. And I know it's a high probability 6 is probably going to go to 2. Or it's going to go. That's a cheater. I got 1, 2, 3, 4 chords already there because I know it's going to end up on a 4. So really, you know, that can provide, when you understand that, that's why I say half of this is just hearing and open up the ear and says, yes, that is the same sound from here to here. That's the same pattern from this song to this song. The next part is applying the knowledge, the shortcuts, knowing how the primary and secondary chords work and how they relate, and why you don't go back to the 1, because you can go to the relative of 1 that provides the same pull. It's really like the 1, it just has a different bass note. That's when you go to the 6. So it's all this knowledge combined at the end to really bring this musical process together. So you got diatonic chords, you got the sounds they make, and kind of the common variations of the diatonic chords. You got passing chords at work. Now, I also promised to show you what happens when you go outside of the scale. You know, since we moved up to D flat, let's stay at D flat for a little bit. We've been in C. But there's these other tones, like the flat 2. Not a chord tone, but commonly a passing chord to take us to the minor 2, okay? So you got the 1, but that's the flat 2. So oftentimes, you know, when somebody's going from the 1 to the 6, flat 2, 2. You know, they'll use that as a passing chord, you know, to get to the 2 and then to the 5. So that's the first passing chord, is the flat 2. Usually without change, it'll go to the 2. You also have the flat 3. That one doesn't really happen as much, but you can use that with the same kind of chord. And then it can take you to the 3. A lot of gospel does that too. Another common one is the flat 5. And this is kind of like a chordal chord, you know, that we play, and that takes us to the 5. You get that a lot. Okay? That's another passing chord, but it generally takes you up to the 5. Usually these passing chords, they move up a tone and down a tone. So you can go, you know, that works a lot. So it's like flat 5 to the 4 to the 3, or the flat 5 to the 5, the flat 6 to the 6. So a lot of these can work like that. And to see, if I was going from that 6, I would go. So if you hear that in like R&B, slower song, and then so you know. So, you know, so this flat 6, they'll use that too. It goes down too, but usually it'll go up, you know, or they'll use a diminished chord here, because you can go. People do that from the 3 to the 6. If you hear a walk up, commonly, you know, here I'll just hold down the notes. That's a very common movement also in gospel music. So at the end of the day, with your songs, you got chord tones or main things going on, and then you have things in between that help to guide you. Now the difference is, for me, is that if I can take the chord out and there's really not a big deal, it's passing chord. It's moving us places. It's a transitional kind of thing. But if I can't take it out, or at least substitute it with something that's really highly related to it, then it's a main, you know, chord tone, if you will. So you got chord tones, passing tones. There's other things like neighboring tones, upper and lower and some stuff, but you don't have to know it for here. Just know that in between, in gospel music at least, the flat 2, the flat 3, the flat 5, the flat 6. Those are going to be your popular ones. And pretty much those are all the rest. And the flat 7, I almost forgot. Flat 7 is very common. It can lead you to the second tone of the scale. Like if you don't want to end a song, you know, thank you, Lord. There's that passing chord on the second tone. Now, I'm not trying to teach you a song, I'm just demonstrating the transition chords. Thank you, Lord. And then, thank you, Lord. And then instead of going to the 2, some people go, I just want to thank you. So the flat 7, when you play the 4 chord over it, like a G flat major over the flat 7, it really provides a substitute. You know, you can either go from the flat 7 to the 2, from the 2 to the 5. So when you hear that, you might hear an ending and you're saying, it doesn't sound like the common diatonic 2. I'm used to happy birthday to you, okay? But what if I get happy birthday? Still works though, doesn't it? To, or to. You hear that a lot in some songs, to you. So, you know, the other 5 tones that we don't use in the scale, you know, pretty much they happen here. Flat 2, flat 3, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7. You know, there is no flat 4 because it is the 3rd tone of the scale. So those are the other ones, and they have their place. flat 2 taking you to the 2, flat 3 taking you to the 4, when you want to use it that way, but not as common as the others. Flat 5 taking you up or down, you know. Flat 5 up to the 5, or flat 5 down to the 4, and then usually keep going, you know. Or the flat 6 going up to the 7, or more, you know, bluesy or, you know, diminished chord there going up there, or flat 7 taking us to the 5, or flat 7 taking us to the 2. Very common. Bluesy kind of things, flat 7 can bring you back up to the 1 as well, you know. You know, usually when, you know, you're in a minor key, that'll bring you back up home. So that's a quick kind of review of passing chords and kind of what you're looking for in their main roles. In the next section, we're going to cover endings, cadences, and things that trick you up, and how to know, you know, where to find certain things that happen over and over in songs. So I'll see you for cadences. Okay, so welcome to the section on cadences. Now, there are 4 main types of cadences. Now, we're going to start with authentic cadence. And this is basically the 5th tone of the scale coming home. It's the classic happy birthday to you. Okay? So when you hear that, you know that a song is coming to an end when you hear an authentic cadence, okay? Now, there's some branches under it, and we covered this already, but for the most part, when you hear a song ending, it's generally a 5-to-1 progression, or maybe a 4, 5, 1, or that's a 4-1. Worship, you know, and all I'm doing is, well, I changed it there, I'm coming home, but let's take them to my keys. Basically, I'm doing primary chords, but it's setting us up for what we call an authentic cadence. The 4, 5, 1. That's it. G flat major, D flat, G flat, and B flat, with G flat on the bass. A flat major, which is E flat, A flat, and C, with A flat on the bass, and D flat major, first inversion, F, A flat, and D flat, with D flat on the bass. This is an example of how a song is like supposed to sound. You know, that happens a lot. Okay, but we have another cadence, and that's authentic. That's just a typical 5-1 progression. We have another type of cadence. We call it the deceptive cadence, because instead of going 4, 5, 1, we know the 5 is usually supposed to come home. So when you're listening to a song and you hear that, you know, okay, I know what that is. I just have to take it to the right key. But I know that's some kind of 5 coming home, and they're basic major chords. But what if the 5 went anywhere else but home? So what about the 5 going to the 6, or the 5 going to the 3, or the 5 going to the 2? Anywhere else but 5 coming home. That's what we call a deceptive cadence. A cadence is just a chord progression, a chord pattern that ends a song, or ends a phrase, or a verse, or something like that. So instead of going, we're going to go. A lot of songs. See, I'm used to that. We're used to that coming home, but instead it goes to the 6. That's what you call a deceptive cadence, and you need to know that 6 sets you up for that passing chord. Remember, anytime you go to the 2, you can play that flat 2 with the diminished chord. And, you know, and then that'll take you to the 2. I just want to go. You could do passing chord here to take you to your deceptive cadence, or it's a part of your cadence. But anytime you just go from the 5, and instead of coming home authentically, you know, like you're supposed to, or like most songs end, you do something else, you know. It'll come maybe from the 5 to the 3, or the 5 to the 7, 3, 6. It'll do that a lot too. There's that flat 5. You can put that there to the 5, and then finally we come home. So hearing the differences between perfect and deceptive. You also have the amen cadence. So instead of going, you would just go. So it's just the 4 skipping the 5. 4, you know, coming straight home. You know, it's kind of like hallelujah. That's the 1. Hallelujah. You should be listening. That's the 4. Hallelujah. We just went up a little bit. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. That's what we call the amen cadence. The 4 coming straight home to the 1, as if it were the 5 coming home. And they also call it the amen cadence. The plagal cadence is another way to say it. So you need to be able to hear that as well. That happens a lot in songs too, you know. And the very last cadence that we're going to cover is what we call the half cadence. It's like the incomplete cadence. And that's when you're hanging out at the 5. It's usually the middle of your songs, you know. For example, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. There it is right there. Okay, Amazing Grace has it too. It's when you're hanging out at the 5. Yeah, it'll come home, but by the time it comes home, it's the beginning of the next verse, or the next phase of the verse. And that's what you call a half cadence, imperfect cadence, because it has a suspense. It leaves you hanging. Song is certainly not over. It's almost like you reached the middle point of the verse. And you want to listen for those too, because that's a lot different. Every song has them. You know, the wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round. Kind of like that too, round and round. It's not providing a complete ending. It's hanging out there. Okay, so half cadences, they give you that sense of just instability. You feel the need to return home, but it's not home in the same sense as the authentic cadence where, you know, your songs are ending. So as you're listening to cassettes, you know, you should be listening for these differences. Okay, what's a definite authentic cadence? You know, that's the end of the song, or some end of the verse where it's just a complete home. If we wanted to, even though the song's not over, we could stop the song here and people would clap. Authentic cadence all the way. Half cadence, we couldn't stop the song there. If we went, thank you, Lord, and just stopped at a half cadence, we'd be over. And that's kind of a test for you to know. If you can't stop the song there and it seems like it's hanging, usually you're on the 5th tone of the scale. You need to be at the piano to hear that. The 4 chord coming home to the 1 is a lot different than the 5, 1. Okay, so that's the difference. The amen cadence. You know, that's a lot different. And then the deceptive cadence. Oh man, you mean to tell me we didn't come home? And then they'll go backwards. And non-diatonic. You know, and those are your different kinds of cadences. So in the next segment, we'll wrap this up. I'll cover my last summary points. But there you have it, different ways to just think about music from the diatonic scale, the different tones and natural chords that happen, hearing the differences between them, chord tones versus passing tones, cadences, ending your progressions, patterns. It's all here. And most importantly, it's in the other 4 DVDs that have brought you to this point. So I'll see you in my final thoughts.